Safran-Foer is an American writer that was born in February 1977. He has written many other books, extremely loud and incredibly close, eating animals, and of course, everything is illuminated. The book begins with a young man named Alex who lives in the city of Odessa in Ukraine. He is main character. Jonathan's translator. Jonathan, he is coming to Ukraine to learn about a woman by the name of Augustine. This leads to him going to Ukraine to try to find out who Augustine is. A lot of this book is taken from Alex's point of view. He basically probably just learned English a couple of years ago. It leads to him writing about stuff, and when he writes and talks, it's kind of broken English. When Jonathan gets off of the train in a small town in Ukraine, Alex and his grandpa comes and picks up Jonathan. Then they start driving to a hotel, and when they get there, they spend the night there. The next day, after they wake up, Alex announces that he's found Augustine in one of the neighboring villages. They get inside the car, and then they drive out to her house, and they talk to her. Her house is crammed full of items from World War II. Then they eat with her, and then they talk with her about Jonathan's grandpa. And she tells them that she's not actually Augustine, and that her name is actually listed. She did know his grandpa, and she did save him, but she's not Augustine. And I don't think they ever really elaborate who exactly Augustine is. She starts crying, and she talks about how the entire village was stormed, raided by the Nazis, and his grandpa, his wife, and children were killed by the Nazis, and it leaves him pretty mortified, and then he escapes with her, and he goes to America, and then soon after, he ends up dying, just natural causes. She tells them that the reason that she saved Jonathan's grandpa is that she had a relationship with him. At the end of the book, Alex's grandpa is writing a letter to Jonathan inside the bathtub, and as he's writing it, he talks about how he doesn't want there to be really any more violence in the world. He gets about halfway through the letter talking about this, and he commits suicide. It's an excellent book. It has a kind of unique writing style with how in between chapters he writes about Brod and other family. I found that really unique, and you don't see that very often, bouncing between time periods, different writing styles, and it didn't bother me as much as it was it's kind of weird, and you don't see that very often. The only thing that I can kind of think of in pop culture that does this is Pulp Fiction a little bit, how Quentin Tarantino, with how he bounces from boxer 20 days before this guy was killed, before this person, this happened, blah 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 blah. And that's the only thing that I can really think about. That's almost not as close as how kind of weird this style is. It's kind of bizarre, because you don't really see that often. Beginning of the book, I didn't really like it how he would jump to these really old Hebrew parts, from bouncing from that to Jonathan and Alex traveling. When I was reading it, I eventually got so accustomed to it that I actually wanted to read the Jewish parts. It's actually just funny. It's kind of a funny and mildly depressing book, but pretty funny. And I recommend it, I give it about an 8 out of 10, just because of how bizarre the bouncing back from reality to Jonathan writing this book in between sections and stuff. It kind of off-put me at the beginning, but then I grew accustomed to it. But if I was just reading it very casually, I probably would put it down. But I did not read it casually, and it's very good. And for that, it's just an 8 out of 10, but honestly, I really like it, and you should pick it up.